Hi, I'm Natasha Josie, and this is the Being Body Podcast, brought to you by House Ltd. This podcast pulsates amongst creatives and thinkers who are seeking inspiration and purpose in life and are willing to engage and listen, who are perceptive, reflective, sensitive, and critical. We believe that sharing experiences has a unique way to make sense of human suffering, and it is through sharing that we heal, connect, and create. My guest today is a dance practitioner, performer, and activist, Amna Mawaz Khan. Amna completed her master's in Pakistan studies from Quaid-e-Azam University and presented her Arangetram under Indu Mittha. She has given workshops, performed, and choreographed in Pakistan, China, Germany, Switzerland, the UK, and USA. She is a part of Women Democratic Front and Awami Workers Party and is concerned about a society where freedom, dignity, food, safety, housing, and beauty are available to everyone. Amna and I talk about navigating a career as a dance practitioner in Pakistan, managing power imbalances in creative relationships, respecting imperfections in art, and exploring spaces between stillness and movement. So let's get to my wonderful chat with Amna. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing this time and sharing your experiences on life. So I think the first thing that I definitely would like to ask you, I know that you have a history and you've studied politics and you are very much into dance and you've studied under Indu Mittha, and I think amidst all of that and now, what is keeping you busy in life these days?
So I moved to Heidelberg last year, but I kind of try and still be in Pakistan for half of that time because right now I'm jobless. But what keeps me busy is I found a really lovely studio here that's funded by the city government, and they basically have opened their doors to freelance choreographers and dancers in the area. And it's really, really lovely because you get space. When you're new in a place, you don't really know what to do, where to do it. So you find some people, they'll help you out with some, so it's like also good for networking, but just generally just a place to dance was a real godsend for me. So I'm not so it's because it's a free space. It's not like every day, but it's a few times in a week. And then apart from that, when I was living in Lahore for a few years, I took some singing classes under Rustam Fateh Ali Khan ji, and recently they've started them online also, the classes. So I am sometimes joining into that also. And I think that's how I'm spending my time. But then actually the full-time job is these days taking care of my child. So
you have a son.
Yeah, I have a son. He's 3, and so very hands-on.
Definitely. So tell us a little bit about dance, because in Pakistan especially, and also in South Asia, we've got so many overlaps and influences of all kinds of dances. And tell us a little bit about the kind of dance that you are interested in and movement. I've seen your work. It's also, along with choreographed pieces, you're also interested in movement and gesture. So could you talk a little bit more about what kind of dance genre you're interested in or you like to explore in your work?
Yeah, so I as a child, my mother enrolled me into a class which was perhaps the only dance class at the time in Islamabad, and I had the absolute honor to study under Indu Mittha. Quite a few different forms of dance. When I was a child and up to my teen years, she taught us primarily folk dances, Uday Shankar style, which is a kind of a contemporary Indian dance form, Kathak. And then when I think she thought that we had reached an age and some sort of body conditioning, she began teaching us Bharatanatyam, which is a South Indian classical dance form. And I continued to study under her, but it was more like a few times in a week. It wasn't so, because in Pakistan there's no real actual training for dance or theater, or well, maybe in Karachi we have Napa, but there's not really professional training for dance. Whoever does it from their own vocation and their own generosity and their own interest. But yeah, there's no real institution. And so whatever I learned, I mean, I would say definitely I'm not so in it. What happened was that my trajectory, it kind of moved into another way from my teachers. So I kind of got more interested because of the political activism. I got more interested into street theater and into movement, like you say, that is perhaps not bound by classicism, because I find it, I mean, despite that these days, I'm studying under Sai Kripa Prasanna. She's a Bharatanatyam teacher, and I'm training with her online, but I like to keep things parallel. So at the same time, I'm classically training. I feel like I need to train much more, and I don't think there's ever a stop limit where one learns. But at the same time, my practice is parallel, and it's kind of, it tries to go beyond, or maybe even not beyond, let's say behind or below the classical bar, because I think that when one is practicing a performance-based art, the aim is, who are you performing it for? That's the question. So if it's just for yourself, then yeah, it's great to be perfect, and yeah, you can do the highest kicks and the biggest jumps. But are you creating that relationship to whoever you're showing it to? I mean, that's why I think maybe there's been a lot of criticism on my work, because they say that, oh yeah, why did you move away from the classical? But for me, that's not so important. It's not important for me if I'm an excellent performer. What's important for me is what's being said in that performance, how it's being received and then reciprocated. So, yeah. I hope that answers the question. I think
there's so many things, so many thoughts that I was having while you were answering and sharing. I have so many questions that I want to ask you. I'm like, ye jo maine likhe hai side pe rakh deti hu, let me just unpack all that you've said, because you've said so much and it's so all interesting. I think the first thing that I would really like to know, since I also grew up in Islamabad, in Pakistan, how was it like growing up in Islamabad? Because Islamabad is a smaller city, also in terms of institutions and art institutions, and generally the community around art is not so big. And there's very few and far who are engaging. At some point we had a lot of galleries also, but now that also is so thriving. How was it like growing up in Islamabad and interested in dance? And how did your family and how did your community and how did that all experience go for you as a young girl?
Yeah, as a young girl, I think because I never really thought I would take this up as a profession because of the reality check as being a dancer in Pakistan. So, I mean, culturally and respect and all of that stuff comes into play.
Yeah.
But I don't know, luckily or unluckily, I didn't care for that. So what happened was that when I would perform somehow with a group of students under Mrs. Mitta, or sometimes after a certain age, I started getting requests to perform and then choreograph pieces for different groups. So what happened was that I think that because Islamabad is a small city, at that time, like you say, there was like a thriving kind of small art scene, let's say mid 2000s. So for me, it was quite helpful, and I feel like the so-called cultured class was very, very generous. I would, I would be featured in newspapers, and I think that was some kind of capital for me that got me somehow to be known in other places like Karachi or Lahore and stuff like that. But I think that was a good thing for a young artist to be in a kind of small community that's somehow very supportive. But often I know that the opposite happens also in small cities. So everyone's out with their pitchforks, and so it can be either or. But yeah, I was lucky that at that time there were nice people around.
Yeah. So you got the support because as an artist growing up as well, I mean, I was into fine arts and I was into painting and all. And, like that time that when you have to decide what to do next and which degree to choose and which institute to choose, you're always like thinking. And for me, it was always between art and fine arts and architecture, because supposedly the understanding was that architecture, there's still a bit of money and you can actually get a job. But as a fine artist, what do you do? So how did you did you ever have those questions as to like, if you were ever asked what you do and you say, I'm interested in dance, which is also like another offshoot, a bit more specific niche. How did you handle that? Or were you ever asked those questions? It's like, what will you do with your life? And all of those scary questions from a teenager.
So I never really said, "Hey, I'm a dancer." I would always say, yeah, I'm learning that." But my sath I was studying. I did my master's in Islamabad, also in Pakistan studies, which is also not such a lucrative degree. But I guess I just liked the faculty there, and they were very leftist, and I was like, "Yes, I'm going to study there." But I think at the time I didn't really have any thought on the matter, which now I think,
which
oops,
is actually how it generally is. But there's a lot of pressure on kids at that age to know and to figure it all out.
Yeah, and then upar se I had a dadi who was super conservative, and she pretty much said, now that I see your face in these Urdu papers, and you're a dancer, or tumne khandan ki naak kata di hai, or tum kya? Yeah, so I just said, ye wo wala dance nahi hai. But of course, it's like, wo wala aur ye wala kya hota hai,
Kya hota hai?
The woman's body itself is such a matter of shame, unfortunately, or like,
why is that though? Why is there shame associated to, I mean, dance and also singing in Pakistan, music, although music industry is so thriving now more than ever. But, there's always this derogatory sort of undertone to dance and music.
It's so strange because of course, for women, it's hard, but even for men, it's like there's just this, it's like a colonial hangover also mixed with some, I don't know if it's even many people say it's a religious issue, but it's more to do with policing people's expressions. And I think it has a long history, like in the north and the south, with like Kathak dancers, Bharatanatyam dancers. They were totally like just sidelined from society after a certain point because they didn't fall into those normative categories. And of course, because dancers, artists, artisans, musicians, they sell their craft or their work, and so they're seen as kammi, or people who work or who are subservient to the upper classes. So when the upper class, someone from the upper class goes into this horrible,
supposedly,
choice, so then
supposedly,
it's a lot of Wow. And then also, of course, being a woman, it's like, I think just being a woman is so, just having a body as a woman is a liability in Pakistan. And then moving it with your own conviction and your own ideas is even worse. It's like really terrible for so many people. And I think it's definitely because of the patriarchy. And it's because of these age-old ideas that Chadar Char Diwari, which is actually, if you go trace it back into history, you see in early days, like even whether it's India or Arabia, women had much more power in their lives. They were able to move freely. But now here it's like everything is used as an excuse to hold us back.
How do you continue to do what you do amidst this very challenging landscape?
So usually I used to take it with humor, and I used to say, "Chalo, this is just a way to move on and create more stuff and be more inspired." Because it is quite humorous also, and it's sad, of course. But then you feel more convicted somehow to move forward. You just say, okay, because it's so crappy, I must try and create those connections where people feel safe to do this also, or to do whatever they want, where they can stand up and just speak truth to power, whether it's through anything. It can be through writing, it can be through any means of creation. But often what happens is that, like these days, for example, I feel very, very low because when people from the community often, there was a film on my teacher, and it was not taken very in very good terms that I was featured a lot in that film, and somehow the word got out that I want to be a star, and I've used my teacher for like 21 years. So that when people say these things and accuse me of things like that, then especially people who are so-called cultured or who are in the community of artists, when they say things that are so ridiculous and also irrelevant to the whole process of creation, it just really gets low, and then you're just wondering, "Bhai, what am I doing?"
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit drastic.
No. I'm just thinking because that is true. Because the thing with art community, generally art, is that we don't have set out structures or a moral moral compass or some sort of an institutional hierarchy or any sort of understanding of how it works, what is the system like in arts, as well as in music, as well as in dance. There's also a sense of being self-taught, but then there's also a sense of ustad, and especially dance. And dance and music, you have more of ustad than shagird. Ek time pe painting or arts mein bhi tha, but I think now because of institutions us tarah nahi hai. But since dance and music is still a much more exclusive sort of small communities, you have to find it, you have to figure out who you want to work with, and you sort of come under as a student, you sort of have a relationship. Then it becomes a much more of a personal dynamic that you have set with that individual or the community, and it can be challenging to then navigate that space. So how do you think, as a young artist or a young artist who's coming up or is interested in dance, and through your experiences, what are the things that you feel are lacking in our structure, and why do you think this happens, this sense of threatening or a sense of competition that people have contemporary start to develop, even though there is so much of opportunity out there? Why do you think that this is happening, and what are the reasons that we are in Pakistan that with these problems?
I think that's such an important question. For me, I think that it's just a lack of critical thinking. That somehow it's all linked together, from our school curriculums to our culture to creative culture, of course. It's not. Anyhow, moving out from that, but basically,
No, please go ahead. Yes. I want you to talk more about that. Yeah.
I think that there's just this idea of subservience, and somehow if somebody has a position of power, whether it's an instructor or a teacher in a school or an army officer or a bureaucrat, they will go out of their way to show you that they have power. And the process then becomes that we don't ask questions. And then there's this whole understanding that मैं ना चीज. Yeah, तो पहली बात ये, I think that having an ustad and learning is definitely necessary. It's not mutually exclusive. But under that training system, there should not be an abuse of power. It's hard. I mean, I've taught, and I taught on a class of 22 really different people who would come from different religious backgrounds, ethnic, gender, Sara. And then they were almost all working class, and many of them had not even been to a school. And they were professional dancers, and it was really unruly. And often I would be checking myself because I need to realize that, okay, what I'm teaching them somehow needs to make them grow, not make them feel even more subservient. So it's really difficult, but I think for a good teacher, a teacher needs to learn from their student also. Okay, matlab, this is a process. It doesn't end with me. It doesn't begin with them. I was also a student, it's just so cyclical. Or kya hota hai ki because we have historically been stopped, even in our schooling, we've been ridiculed when we question in a classroom. We have been ridiculed when we question the government, or even worse, in different parts of the country. So there is I think there's an overarching fear to kind of be critical. And I think that's why art and the creation of art is so necessary, because it somehow, in a nuanced way, pushes those boundaries and inspire and can inspire. It has that power of breaking all of that fearful environment. It's hard, and yeah.
No, I completely agree with you, and more so than ever now, when at a few years ago, even when we were sort of kids, you didn't have a sense of like the global presence, and everyone is sort of the world being so accessible to you. But now more than ever it is, and I still feel that institutions, we are following similar formats of keeping the classroom under just sort of the jurisdiction of one teacher, and then just only talking about what is happening within that classroom, and not bringing in the sort of sense of the world and what's happening in the world, and what are the other formats of learning and teaching that exist. And I think that for you, who has, I think, experienced both, where you were in an institution, and you were going to the university or the school or the college and following a particular format, and then you had the relationship with your dance teacher, and you were learning on a very different format. Having experienced both of these formats, what do you think worked for you as a student, and which do you still hold on to as a teacher now when you conduct a workshop yourself? What sort of tools that you think are the most resourceful for you along the way, that you've learned or picked up or developed on your own, or things that you felt, okay, these didn't work well for me, I need to change this around a bit? Are there anything that you figured out on your journey?
Yeah, I think that my time training under Ms. Mitha was super amazing, because she, even at her age, I mean, we have quite a few decades between us, but after a certain point in time, I was the only one from my class that stayed on. And then it became almost she says she's not very spiritual, but she's somebody who really imbibes this thing. She's often someone who says, you need to figure it out yourself. So I was lucky to have her as a teacher, because often, especially when I grew older, she would say, okay, I'm not going to explain this abhinaya, this expression to you. It has to come from inside, because I don't want to create a photocopy. So those kind of principles I keep with me, and I keep them close to my heart. And then on the other hand, things like in a university, where there's a schedule, where there's an end point, at the end of this semester, I have to do this. So very goal oriented.
Yeah.
I think that helps also in in things like dance and different forms of art, like just knowing, okay, this is a process, but at the end of this period, I'm going to give myself, like after 6 months, I will task myself to make something. And for sure, it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be for an audience, but just to keep oneself in check, that am I holding myself responsible to this label I'm giving myself? Like, am I creating? So even if it's creating bakwas, you don't have to show it. And bakwas, honestly, I don't know what bakwas is, because often people say, oh yeah, your work is very substandard, it's not classical. And I'm like, it's okay. It's all right if it's substandard. What is standard? Whose standards are these? I think we also have to question that. Not saying be lazy and create crap, but also kind of questioning those limits. Like, why is it that, because, for example, in Bharatanatyam, the style was standardized in the late, let's say, late 19th century, and then in the 20s to the 40s, this whole school and the standard of Kalakshetra began, and actually, the practitioners of Bharatanatyam had a much more flowy, much more open way when accessing that dance form. And then they were literally told, okay, you're literally not good enough. Your form is not worthy. And so we need to systematize the dance form. And definitely what happened was that the dance form reached a level of classicism. So there's a pro and a con to it, I think. If you want to institutionalize something, and you want to study it in a way, then there's a lot of free-flowing ideas, free-flowing, just letting yourself flow into the form. That also goes away, and it's more about performance then, and functioning.
Yeah. So you've performed in Pakistan in many venues and events. I actually remember I was at one of Fulbright's events, and I didn't know that you were performing there, and it was such a interesting sort of happenstance that I at the end of the conference we were having, I don't remember which conference this was, but there was in Islamabad, and then there was a performance by you at the end, and you were in performing on stage in front of these academics and people from all walks of life, and you were performing classical dance, Bharatanatyam. And then how was that experience for you? Because I, as an artist, often found those spaces quite inaccessible for me, as to what sort of conversations can I have. For you, I was very interested to know how has your experience been, and if you could share one interesting experience with us of your any sort of performance of how performing in front of a live audience, how is that in Pakistan?
Good question. But often I think now with all these smartphones, it's ridiculous to be performing in front of anyone, because they're all like busy to take a recording and not even interested by what are you showing. They're more interested in the projection that they have seen a performance. So especially once it was my first and last, I think, corporate show.
Yeah.
I was dancing because I needed the money, of course. So a friend of mine who's a dancer in Lahore said, oh yeah, we have space for a dancer. You come, and it's for a big company. And I was like, already a bit like, but I said, okay, sure. If you're paying me, I'll do.
Yeah.
And so we go, we perform, and it's like the biggest, like it's some creepy, I don't know, like award show of this company. And the whole front row, they were not even looking. They were just talking to each other. And it's like, hey, we're on a platform, we're dancing, we're sweating, we're doing whatever we can to kind of try and reach you. And you don't even want to look. And somehow there's, I think it's like a feudal residue, no? Like this whole thing कि ये लोग तो हमारे लिए नाच रहे हैं या गा रहे हैं, and this is just on the side. And it reminds me a lot of singers who are in these big hotels, जो restaurants में बजा रहे हैं और कोई सुन ही नहीं रहा, you know, like it's like, come on, this guy or girl, whoever it is really trying and creating magic sometimes, but आप सुन ही नहीं रहे. So crazy. One really interesting comment I got actually was in one of these kind of shows where they were all like, I don't know, it was for some cultural, I don't know, koi organization, NGO type. And yeah, they were nice. They were at least watching. But at the end of the show, this one lady came to me and she was maybe like in her 40s, and she came to me and she said, you know, I've never ever seen a live dance performance in my life, and I was so moved, and this was something, and I really thought, look at the dirt, na? Like in the West, you see every day there's something happening.
Yeah.
And there's such a dearth of things, and even especially now, I think in Pakistan, Islamabad especially, such a dearth. At least 10 years ago, there used to be theater and Lok Virsa used to have things, but now it's radio silence.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like in the political kind of performances, jahan pe it's more not so many cultural kya kehte hain, enthusiasts, but more like unexpecting who are like, ye kya ho raha hai? But those responses are very interesting.
Yeah.
Once I was giving a workshop in this feminist school in a place near Nasirabad in Sindh, and this woman who was maybe 80 years old, she started singing and she just went into like a frenzy, and she was like, this is the first time I'm dancing. And again, these things really, really take me by surprise, even though of course we know that this happens, that women are kept so far away from means of expression.
Yeah.
And when it hits, somehow they have that privilege or something to actually encounter it or get that space, then it creates such magic. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that experiential art forms, may it be dance, may it be music, theater, for me, performance art, there's always definitely a hit and a miss. A lot of times you have rehearsed it and you know what's going to happen, but then sometimes performance doesn't come through, and then sometimes when it does come through, it is able to touch you in ways that you know, emotionally and spiritually, you get to experience something that is more than what you saw, and that stays with you and sort of resonates with you continuously and surfaces again in life and changes you in ways that maybe you could not have planned or beforehand. So that is definitely one thing I agree with you personally as well. कि वो goosebumps वाला जो moment होता है when you're watching something, just like, oh my god, what is this, you know?
It's so interesting, no? It's really magic when it's something to do with time and space and something in between them, and somehow they hit together. And the misses are very funny in hindsight, like the missed, the missed moments. Like often with me, it's happened, especially in some government places where they're like, okay, koi nahi, and I'm like, I need to do a rehearsal. Can we do a tech rehearsal? Nahi, madam, ho jayega. And I'm like, ठीक है, हो जाएगा. और फिर आखिरी मोमेंट में जब म्यूजिक लगाना होता है तो ऑक्स भी सही नहीं डाली हुई और वो stage, and just oh my god, so many times this happens. It's so funny and it's so enraging and disgusting कि भाई आप सुन लो मेरी बात, please. Like there's no respect for the artist even. It's just like आपका slot है, आप करें जो करना है.
Right.
ऐसे नहीं होता.
Definitely, there's much more of a structure that is required, and understanding of the art form. So we were talking about
industry.
Yeah. So when were you ever able to tell that this performance was able to speak? Can you tell as a performer, okay, I think we just created magic.
Sometimes, not always. Like actually this year at Aurat March in Islamabad, I was working with this really interesting poet. Her name is Rubina Ahmed, and she does spoken word and Punjabi poetry. And a friend of ours in this organization we're in, she said, "Okay, Amna, you're coming to Pakistan. You perform this with her." And I had just heard the poetry, and I worked on it on my own, and we never got a chance to even meet, but we had to perform together at the march. Like at these marches, if you're doing something, it can be a real miss. Like because people are in a mood for they want some action, and if there's spoken word and just one person doing some random stuff, so wo nahi. But it was really the opposite of what I expected, because I think we both came in with this intention to work with the topic, and the topic was about women, of course, but also about a woman just as a woman. कि बस मैं एक औरत हूँ. I'm just a woman. I'm not your wife. I'm not your daughter. I'm not this. I'm not that. I don't have this honor attached to me. I don't have, and I didn't really think it would work out because there was no music even. But I think after that, when it was uploaded in different places and when I saw people's comments, that's when I realized, oh, okay, people resonated with it.
Right.
So often it's like you don't even know because you're so in the process of it or in the flow of it, you don't even realize what's happening outside. And I think often, yeah, it happens you know that what you're doing, what your piece is, will hit some notes with people. And sometimes it's the technicality of it कि अच्छा बहुत तेजी से मैं कुछ कर रही हूँ तो जो शौकीन हैं वो कहेंगे वाह वाह वाह
Yeah.
जो topic है so it's often like in Pakistani the dance audience I've noticed जितने आप चक्कर करो और जितना तेजी से करो तो और भी लोग पागल हो जाते हैं but
right
it's more
technique
like
they want to see technique.
Yeah, technique and speed, and somehow the strength in slowness and the strength in just trying to find a nuance between stillness and movement is totally out. No, because this is an age of Twitter word limits and quick TikTok sensationalism. There's definitely a need to bring this back, this understanding that there can be things that are slow cooked and also beautiful. But yeah.
Yeah. I think we definitely now after COVID, especially with everyone's relying so much on social medias to exist, and I think to spend time and to just exist generally. I think that impatience, I think, has definitely increased, and also like with I hate to say this word, but the younger generation, now that we're in this place, we can say this word.
Yeah, we can say
it. We can say this, but I think they are, having grown up in a social media sort of world, they are also more sort of quick fixes mentality. And I think that what you're saying it does not have that that immediate pull, but it is so much important for your spiritual growth, for just growing as a human being. And I think that sort of relationship and that understanding can only be experienced, and one can only know what wealth and depth one of experience one can get through really understanding about life, about stillness, about contemplation, about movement, what a movement means. um I just want to quickly also ask you one. I know you briefly touched upon this earlier in the conversation, but I'm always very intrigued to know the relationships of communities and how communities function in Pakistan, especially art communities. And for you as a dancer, in Pakistan, how do you feel the community is within? How do you feel spoken to?
Within the community, I find it very interesting that the younger generation, like let's say the ones who I know or who I've worked with, it's mostly really, really good. Um, I mean, with people like Wahab Shah or Suhai or Adnan or Mani Chao or Asfandiar Khatak, and everyone's spread out somehow, but they kind of come together to sometimes when there's a project or it's quite a supportive community, but it's of course very small. And this is my personal experience. Many others have had bad experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens in small communities is that if there is a misunderstanding, then often it does really blow out of proportion. And then people pick sides, and then there's often outcasts and stigmas, which is kind of happening to me these days. But luckily, I think that the younger generation always been super lovely. And I think what happens actually in things like the arts is that um, I think, like you said, like a dearth of institutions and a dearth of a kind of standard where people just interact. But it's not only in Pakistan. I think it's all across with this art, so-called. I think this art. What is it? Like a glitterati or whatever we would call it. Like those who are kind of famous, then want to hold on to something, and then become super toxic, and then ultimately just demotivate so many people from actually thinking about art as a practice for themselves. And yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a global issue because art has so much power to not only positive but also negative power. I feel it has a power the way the state has control over so many art forms like the TV dramas we see or the films we see, or I mean, I would even call schooling art, but maybe that's a bit too much for some people. But it is an art to form minds, and it's somehow so it's it closes people's brains in a way, and art can do that with propaganda, of course. But yeah, but my experience, let's say, with my contemporaries has been very good, and even with the elder dancers, I mean, I would still say my relationship with Indu Ji is, despite everything, I find that my relationship with her somehow, somewhere is there, and I don't think things can, even despite toxicity, one can remember that there was a time before this. And apart from that, my relationship with Nigat Chaudhary, she's lovely, she's very supportive. I've never really met Nahid Siddiqui, but we talked once over the phone, and she's very sweet. And Shima Kirmani, like they're all very nice. And the interesting thing is that many students of these big names have issues and with them because, of course, it happens in Ustad Shagird relationships. But yeah, luckily for me, I mean, apart from the recent issue, I've always had good experiences.
And once someone who is going through a toxic experience in the community, what would you tell them? How to navigate that, or how to keep continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through it right now, and I don't think I've really figured that answer out because I have really bad moments. Like just before we started this conversation, I was like, because there was more trolling. But I think that for me, I try and zoom out, and I see that what is being done is beyond my person and beyond whoever's person, and it is in itself a universe, that form, that question, that practice. And it's okay. Sometimes you don't feel like doing it. You don't feel like dancing or painting or any of it. Then give yourself a break. I think it's okay. Because if we just say, okay, no, I have to do this because I have to, it's hard because then that work also then kind of projects that feeling, and then you just feel really bad. So it's of course a privilege if you're somebody who's working in like, you have to dance or you have to do things that are your livelihood. Then yeah, of course you can't take a break, but try and see moments where you can disengage, because sometimes the art form really takes over your being, which is it's good and bad, but it's good to have some sort of a gauge where you're like, okay, Abhi, I just need to disengage. That helps.
Amna, what would you say to your younger self?
Yeah, I would say don't believe in people so much. It's a really negative thing, but don't believe in people like they are the end all. Like we were discussing actually, like believe in the process. Don't even believe in yourself so much. I think I would tell myself, like, don't be so sure. Because I think with my younger self was more like, okay, this is happening. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. Like there was no real process of, internalizing, okay, I'm going to be a dance practitioner for a few more decades of my life. Do I want to do this? It's good to pause.
Yeah.
And I think now with this age, I'm realizing that it's good to just
pause.
stop. And then restart. It's okay. But it's good to be unsure. That's very necessary.
So lovely. Thank you so much, Amna, for taking out so much time, being so generous.
Thank you. And I hope the same for you.
Thank you for tuning in. This has been a presentation by House Ltd. I hope you will listen, follow, rate and review all our episodes, which are available free on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Anchor, Pocket Casts, and the official House Ltd YouTube channel.